Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to a new video. Before anything happens, I must ask you, implore you, beg you to subscribe, like, and comment down below. I was a little bit over the top in that I thought we might make 2.5 thousand subscribers before Election Day. Evidently, we didn't. Or not evidently, depending on when you're watching this. But if you're watching a Senate prediction like that far into the future, you're coming back to bully me. Thing is, usually right, unlike most, I'm willing to bet that this doesn't age too poorly. But we didn't hit that, so let's see if we can eventually. Also, my mic quality is better. That speaks to something I want to talk about. I'll skip 2 minutes ahead if you don't want to hear this. Um, I haven't been the best to you guys, and I know Luke has said it, and I think that's humble of him, but I put him in a tough position, and this is why I put out the post saying I betrayed you. You guys have been betrayed. Um, I put him in a very tough position. He's got a lot to do, and I've been mad at him unjustly. Um, he's got a lot to do, and I think that ultimately, also at the end of the day, people when they watch this channel are watching it for me. Um, I think that it is best if I myself input into this. So I got a mic. This is rented, but still pretty good quality. Um, we are back, and I am ready to begin resuming content, resuming everything. So I figured I'd start off with a Senate prediction because this seems pretty generic, pretty normal, and especially after the November 2025 elections, a lot of people are shitting themselves. A lot of people, their Senate predictions are this, Democrats, they're going to win back the Senate, and it's going to be so big, it's going to be so massive. Doug Jones is going to run and win. A lot of people are dooming. And, you know, like I said in my postmortem, um, there is cause for concern among the GOP. And setting aside the ideological shifts, whether it's worth voting for the GOP, it was a pretty bad night objectively. They did get crushed. And I think that it is important now that we set a baseline because the Senate prediction can age two ways. Either Republicans continue their collapse. Trump doesn't govern effectively, and I don't think he's governed effectively, but he governs worse. And potentially Democrats could retake the Senate. I think that's on the table. It shouldn't be precluded from possibility. It shouldn't be treated as just as likely as Republicans holding the Senate, or even just as likely as Republicans holding the House. I think that's far more likely. But it is a legitimate possibility that should be considered. Um, and two, this prediction could age the other way because there are some signs that Trump is focusing more on issues like affordability, which will help him, especially among young voters. Plus, turnout will be higher in the midterms. And if Trump is able to solve those problems with his base, with a lot of the swing voters who flipped him, with a lot of the minority voters, or even peel off some Harris voters into supporting him, there's a legitimate chance that you could have a good night for Republicans in 2026. The Senate map is pretty good. Republicans control 53 seats. Only one of those states is a Harris seat, while two Democrats are in Trump states, and only one of those states are in states that Trump won by less than 10%, while Democrats have quite a few incumbents in similarly blue leading states for Kamala Harris, especially since you have one, two, three Democrats retiring in pretty key states. Minnesota, maybe not, but especially Michigan and New Hampshire are potentially going to be close. So we are in for a dogfight in the Senate where a lot of these races will be pretty narrow. So I figured we'd fill this out, check on how things are going, and see what the GOP can expect heading into 2026. So there's some safe seats. I guess Nebraska, we can't. Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, most of the South, West Virginia. There's rumors of Manchin running again. I really don't think he's ever coming back. Maybe if Capito is primary, it could be under 10, but even so, we don't know that he's running again. And I doubt that he'd get the Democratic nomination. I doubt Democrats would set aside to allow him to strut into Washington. South Carolina, plus Florida has been trending right. And I really don't think Democrats invest this time around. They've been doing it every single time. I think there are states that actually voted for Trump by more. That will be more competitive in the Senate. Moody also probably one of Republicans' um, best senators in terms of electability in these like kind of low safe margin states for Trump: Iowa, Ohio, Texas, Alaska, specifically. So I think Republicans emerge or begin the night at 46 seats, while Democrats, one, two, um, three, four, New Jersey, especially after the 2025 gubernatorial race, I just don't think will be that competitive. I think Cory Booker is very popular, and I think a lot of the minority shifts that you saw in 2024 won't completely reverse even at 2020 levels, but they won't be as strong. And especially with Mikey Sherrill winning Morris County, it's going to be tough for Republicans to make New Jersey close. Massachusetts, though, interesting primary to watch there. Rhode Island, Illinois, also, I think just based off the year. If the year gets worse for Democrats, I could potentially see it getting closer. It's only a Harris plus 11 state. And that is probably it for and I have one more. Warner is a pretty strong overperformer in Virginia. I think he holds on. But you are seeing some of the federal worker stuff is being canceled. If that continues into the election, you could potentially see Nova shift blue by even more. That really seemed to piss them off in that 2025 gubernatorial race. Though we have to wait and see. That will not be decided immediately. So Republicans have a four-seat advantage, but that kind of obscures their inherent advantage, which is that Nebraska, Iowa, Texas, Alaska, and honestly, Ohio are all probably likely Republican. Nebraska, you have Pete Ricketts, a relatively popular former governor, appointed to the Senate seat running against Dan Osborne. Osborne was able to do pretty good in 2024. And had 2024 been more of a environment like 2026 is shaping up to be, he could have potentially gotten that race very close. The problem is he's running again, and these repeat moderate, um, you know, lightning in a bottle candidates running again really doesn't work out. I think a good example is Jack Ciattarelli. That didn't work great there, but the problem is, I think the more he runs, the more he's going to be needled on previous stuff. And I think that Deb Fisher does not know how to run a campaign. Pete Ricketts is much better at running a campaign. He's much more popular. Um, he's got a lot more appeal, especially in suburbia, which is really where Osborne overperformed. He did good in rural areas, but especially in Omaha, due to his union support, he did pretty good. And even though I think Nebraska will shift to the left, and I think this is probably narrowly under 10, I still think Ricketts has the ability to hold on, probably by a wider margin than Fisher, since he's not a complete fucking idiot. Iowa as well, seemingly not doing too good because of Trump. A lot of people are reading way too much into specials, but Republicans don't have the best bench. Ashley Hinson's fine, but Democrats do have an okay slate of candidates here. It's not also the most right trending state, obviously, and Seltzer being one thing that gets Democrats' hopes up here. But also, the state only shifted like 7 points to the right, I think, in 2024, which, if I'm not mistaken, is a trend right, but not that large of a trend right. Um, I still think the state is close enough. 13 points really isn't that much compared to 10 points to rebound a little bit. Plus, I think the Rust Belt turnout will be down a bit, um, especially in districts like the second and third. In the south of Iowa, I think that Hinson's going to underperform, probably ends up losing the third, and the second's going to be closer. Yeah, the second or no, that's the first. The first and third. The first will be closer. She'll do good in her home district of the second. Probably wins that by honestly 10 to 15. And then Feenstra's district, pretty much exclusively rural areas. She'll do good in. So she'll do good mostly in these northern areas compared to Trump. Maybe a little bit of rural areas, but the rural areas will fall off. And some union and farm worker support will peel off, but not enough to make it a particularly competitive race. Ohio, Sherrod Brown, I don't want to say Sherrod Brown is running against John Husted. Husted being the former lieutenant governor of Ohio, um, appointed by Governor Mike DeWine to replace J.D. Vance. This was a special election. Florida also, but Ohio is a special election, which Democrats are fucking lucky about because this is probably their only chance to take a Senate. This is the closest out of these likely states. I could see Nebraska being closer if Osborne continues to have his special sauce, which I don't think he does. But you see Sherrod Brown losing a lot of union support. Be careful about these endorsements. If you went based off endorsements, Jack Ciattarelli would be governor, and Abigail Spanberger probably would have won by 25%. Politics are polarizing, but that probably ends up hurting Democrats in Ohio. Plus, Husted is objectively a better candidate than Moreno. Do I like him better than Moreno? Not really. but based on who I like, doesn't really inform stuff. And I think that Sherrod Brown, you saw his coalition in 2024 shift a lot more to suburbia compared to 2018. And I just don't think he shifts back a lot of these working class areas like Mahoning or shifts them back enough. Already, Sherrod Brown is tied or losing in the early polls. The early polls, he led by nearly 10 points against Moreno in 2024. Yes, Husted is an incumbent, but he's a low level incumbent, being former lieutenant governor. Not many people know him. And even you see Ramaswamy overperforming. I think that I think that'll be enough to hold this Senate seat. Though Shed Brown could put up a bit of a fight. Texas, this is a shit show. You have John Cornyn considered dead on arrival. Now considered dead on arrival, no longer. Ken Paxton has had some scandals, and Wesley Hunt, the representative, has jumped in to contest this race. If Cornyn is renominated, probably ends up winning, and that's another video in and of itself, the primary challenges. But if Cornyn is renominated, probably ends up winning by a high likely margin. Still a shift left, especially in suburban Texas. We saw a special election out of Tarrant County, which shifted a solid 15 points Democrat. It's not everything, but it does show that, especially in these lower turnout years, a lot of Hispanics, which shifted suburbia right, aren't going to vote as Republicans. Same thing with the Rio Grande Valley. Don't expect to see Webb County or Hidalgo County red this time around. If it's Paxton, it could be a little bit closer, and it could take Ohio as the closest likely Republican state and the most likely path for Democrats to make the Senate 50-50. Though it definitely remains to be seen. And if it's Hunt, I honestly think Hunt's probably the most solid choice. I think Hunt, really no part of the base dislikes him. I think turnout would be relatively high for him, though there are other races on the ballot, so it's not like turnout would just collapse with Cornyn heading the ticket. I support Hunt. I would support Paxton after Hunt in a Paxton versus Hunt runoff. I'd probably support Hunt, though honestly, I think Texas deserves to have John Cornyn locked out of the runoff, and I think that Hunt is most likely, a vote for Hunt is more likely to contribute to that than a vote for Paxton. So I recommend that people vote for Hunt because Paxton probably makes the runoff regardless. He probably gets first. Vote for Hunt so you can lock Cornyn out of the runoff. Alaska also is weird, kind of isolated from the rest of the United States in politics, a lot bluer in these midterm years. Plus, Peltola has been mulling a run for Senate. Schumer has tried to recruit her. I think she could potentially make this close. But I also think Dan Sullivan is broadly popular, as evidenced. Even in 2020, they ran an independent against him. Mind you, that independent strategy got Nebraska to ticket split by 14 points and got Utah to ticket split by a solid 15 compared to what it would be against a Democrat. And still, he ended up winning by a solid 10 to 12 points. I think he might have even outran Trump. He's very popular, and some polls don't show that, but polls in Alaska are horrific. Those same polls had Kamala Harris within the margin of error, Donald Trump. That didn't exactly pan out. I think the state isn't shifting right by that much. It could potentially trend left in the future. I think that Peltola could do well, especially among natives, which is a big group in Alaska. If you can run it up with them, that's where Trump has gotten his shift to the right from, the natives in Alaska. I think she could do well among suburbia, but the problem is suburbia is like 70-30 Republican. Even if you make that 65-35, you're probably losing statewide. So I think that one could be close, and we really won't have a metric on how that goes, which will make it annoying. And honestly, part of the reason why I hope Peltola doesn't run is because I really won't have an idea of the Senate race. And I don't think anyone will either until the votes are counted on election night. That was the exact same thing with the 2022 special, exact same thing with 2022 general, exact same thing with 2024 general. So here's to hoping, also because it makes my color light up the map more. As for likely Democrat, New Mexico is one of them. Which one is this? I think this is Lujan's seat. He's relatively strong, not as strong as Heinrich, but the state does ticket split a lot, much bluer down ballot. Hispanics aren't shifting that right and probably end up reverting a little bit heading into the midterm. Plus, as I said before, New Mexico, you have suburbia and a lot of the liberal college-educated whites as a monolith. They'll make it very hard to win the state into the future. Out of Albuquerque and Los Alamos, I think is the other city in New Mexico. The problem is those present enough of a challenge for Republicans to win. You have to peel off a few of them. If you can peel off a few of them and do better among suburbanites, potentially the state could be competitive in the future. Otherwise, I don't think so. And I think in this midterm, Expect another 9 to 10 point win for Democrats in the Senate. Minnesota, I really don't like to factor in candidates here, but Minnesota is actually looking like it could be a bit of a redder environment because Tim Walz is tied to Kamala Harris, and Kamala Harris still remains brutally unpopular even into Trump's term. Tim Walz is polling very poorly for his gubernatorial race. We have to wait and see, but that could potentially be close. But out of this race, it looks like Peggy Flanagan probably upsets Angie Craig. I think the consensus was that Peggy Flanagan, Lieutenant Governor, Angie Craig, very popular Congresswoman. If Craig jumped in, probably would lean to her. But you're seeing a bit of a progressive wave in these primaries. Obviously, Omar Fateh ended up losing to Jacob Frey, but I think that was mostly because it was a general election. Enough Republicans and independents crossed over, technically, because it's a weird system. The Democrats endorsed Fateh and then removed it, but enough of them ended up voting for Frey that he ended up holding on. I think in a primary it would be different, and I do think Peggy Flanagan has enough broad support to win here. She's not a good nominee, but the problem is Republicans don't have a bench in the state. And it's either going to come down to Royce White or Mike Lindell. If they put up someone better, which they could potentially, but it looks like everyone's going for governor because it's obvious governor is going to be a much, much more likely race to flip than Senate. You even have the Minnesota Speaker of the House running for governor, which she could be a phenomenal nominee. We have to wait and see on that. But it seems like Republicans just aren't contesting Minnesota on the Senate level, which, to be fair, probably realistic. So I think that probably ends up holding for Democrats. So if this doesn't underscore how bad of a map this is for Democrats, I don't know what will. And it'll get a little bit better. But the problem is you have a lot of likely red races. And this is just the Senate map as a whole, plus the special elections in Ohio and potentially Florida could make this. So you don't have that many for Democrats. Like potentially, especially before 2025, Virginia, New Jersey could have been likely. But that's the problem with Chuck Schumer's leadership. He's got an okay candidates like Janet Mills in Maine could be okay. We'll get to Maine. Roy Cooper's a good candidate. Michigan, you got no one. New Hampshire, you got Chris Pappas. He's okay. But where he really has excelled, Sherrod Brown in Ohio, Dan Osborne in Nebraska, Texas. Tallarico's not that great. He is a bit of an adulterer, Mr. fucking Bible thumping bitch. Alaska, Mary Peltola potentially. But these aren't winnable states. And the problem is these swing states, Democrats have to win every single swing state and two of these seats. So if things get worse, if the economy falters more, potentially, it's just as of now, that's just not the case. So out of these, as for lean Democrat, first of all, I'd put North Carolina. Roy Cooper is running a pretty strong campaign. Michael Watley is good at fundraising. We have to see, but even fundraising didn't matter that much. Republicans spent a shit ton on Virginia this year. Didn't pan through whatsoever. And Michael Watley just doesn't have charisma. He's not running the best campaign on the issues. You do have stuff like the Irinya Zarathustra. I forget what her name is. But the Charlotte train stabbing, which could help. It's just at some point, I don't think crime is going to be a number one issue. I think Roy Cooper is popular enough. He's unattacked, which means that this could be close, and I don't think it's a 4 to 5 point win so much as like a 1 to 2 point win, especially since Cooper really didn't do that good in 2020. But as of now, I think it's pretty obvious that Democrats are favored in North Carolina. The state really isn't shifting that much to the right, and I think he'll do well enough in suburbia, especially rural areas, I think is where Cooper will excel, since I just don't think Watley is an inspiring enough a candidate to do well there. So I think Cooper ends up winning by about 1 to 2%. Same thing with New Hampshire. New Hampshire, Chris Pappas is a strong candidate. John Sununu, one of Republicans' only good recruits, man. You miss Kemp. I mean, you really couldn't have gotten anyone good in North Carolina. I guess you continued to get Susan Collins. Wee, wow. Michigan, Rogers is fine, but John Sununu is a phenomenal recruit. I think the Sununu name will help a lot. And I think that New Hampshire even saw this in 2025, where Republicans did phenomenal. They flipped mayorships in such a horrific national environment. I think New Hampshire is right or off here. So the fact that Don Bolduc was a complete fucking dumbass, and the same thing with the entire Republican slate in 2022, drove up Democrat turnout, drove down Republican turnout, and led to a relatively blue year in the state. I think you're going to see that reverse in 2026. I don't think Republicans will win it. I think they've got a serious shot at New Hampshire. Chris Pappas is a strong candidate. Sununu is stronger. So New Hampshire, they have an anti-incumbency streak, but I really think that's coming to an end, especially in these midterms. I think that any Republican would have won New Hampshire, but they really wouldn't have won it, or besides for Trump, they wouldn't have won it by the margin that you would think with an unpopular Democrat president in the White House. You tell someone in 2012 Republicans are winning Michigan, Nevada, Wisconsin, they're going to say, oh, okay, so they win New Hampshire by 10 or 12. And you're seeing that come to an end. With the changing coalitions, but I also think anti-incumbency isn't that big of a factor in New Hampshire anymore, especially with economic issues kind of leaving the forefront of politics. Potentially, the economy getting worse could impact that, but like people aren't citing tax codes in their run for office and their runs for office anymore. I think we're entering a different age. So I think that's it for lean Democrat, lean Republican. There's one in Maine, Susan Collins. If she's up against Janet Mills, that's going to be a race to watch. That could be an interesting race. Once again, polling in Maine is batshit, so we won't know. But I think lower turnout could potentially help Susan Collins, seeing as you have more of a suburban, more traditional Republican electorate, whereas Susan Collins will overperform. I think Mills is popular. I don't think she'd do well with progressives, and I think you're seeing Maine kind of descending into complete chaos on the Democrat side. Maine second now, LePage, or not LePage, Jared Golden is out. He probably would end up endorsing Susan Collins in a reelection. You're seeing a brutal primary there where Bernie himself is intervening to stop an electable Democrat from running because if that Democrat were to lose, it would make it look bad for progressives. Um, you're seeing the gubernatorial primary field be wide open. And you're seeing out of Senate, Graham Plattner versus Janet Mills. Now, Janet Mills came out swinging. Everything she had in Graham Plattner, she released. And you've seen that she's got nothing now. No more is released. And I still think Plattner is the favorite to win the primary. I think Mills is age. And you're missing the moment. And what this is, potentially Mills could win. It's not like Mills would instantaneously win the general election, but I think a good comparison is Delaware Senate 2010. At first, I thought Plattner's campaign was completely astroturfed, but I think you're seeing a decent amount of the Democrat, anti-establishmentarian, and progressive faction get behind him, and I think that gives him the nomination. I think he is an unfathomably terrible candidate, and completely easy to beat. Now, as for Michigan and Georgia, Georgia, I'm going with my gut. Obviously, we had the Public Service Commission elections, but to be fair, one, black turnout was massive, and two, Service Commission in Georgia is hilariously corrupt and hilariously hated. It was pretty inevitable that eventually the Republican majority, mind you, they have 5 out of 5 seats. It's not exactly very democratic, but it was inevitable that it would end up flipping. I think Republicans played their hands wrong where they had 2 seats up. Now, I think one of those seats is up for re-election in 2026, so that could be a potential flip. But Republicans played it wrong in that now Democrats have only one more seat that they need to flip to get a majority, which would be like the first time Democrats control anything on the statewide level in Georgia, short of the Senate seats, in a while, which isn't good. But out of Georgia, Republicans have a series of pretty good candidates. Dooley is not going to be the nominee. He also sucks. Buddy Carter is a good candidate, massive overperformer, and relatively well liked with the base. And Mike Collins is also a pretty good candidate. He's polling relatively well. Polls aren't everything. My gut says that black turnout relative to the state at large will be down. Ossoff is not as popular as the Public Service Commission is hated in the state, and you'll see a bit of the anti Republican energy die down by then. Ossoff's approvals are also not that great. They're comparable to Purdue's in 2019, late 2019. It's not great. I think Ossoff is an overrated candidate, underratedly bad candidate. I think Republicans have a serious shot at knocking him off. I think had Kemp run, this race would be a done deal, even with how bad of a year 2025 was. I think Kemp would win quite easily. But because Kemp didn't run, I think you got a race on your hands, but I think as of now, I have to say that Ossoff is favored. Um, I think that he probably, as of today, would crack 50% of the initial round. I think he'd win by like a 1 point margin, but I think in a runoff, especially without Senate control on the line, it'd be close, but I think he'd win by under a point. I'm going to always predict the runoff in Georgia. That's just my decision from now on. Um, so I'd say that you have like a 0.8% race on your hands. Michigan also is tough. Really don't have a good candidate there. Mallory McMorrow would be pretty good. I think her campaign is insanely astroturfed. Haley Stevens is likable by no one, but she seems like the perfect candidate to capitalize on like the moderate Democrat resurgence that we're seeing in general elections, not in primaries. In fact, in New Jersey, where a moderate Democrat was elected, had progressives unified, they probably would have. They would have been nominated and probably would have won the governorship by an embarrassingly small margin, especially given the fact that fucking Virginia voted Democrat by 15. I still can't get over that. And had Abigail Spanberger been challenged by a legitimate progressive challenger, I still think she would have won, but it would have been much closer in the primary than you would have liked. Jay Jones won the primary, Ghazala Hashmi won the primary. You're seeing, extremist progressive Democrats do very well in these primaries, but moderate Democrats are doing very well in the general. So Haley Stevens, I still think she would win the general. Then you have Abdul El Said, who is like insanely progressive, nut job, extremist. Also, a lot of backing behind him, like Plattner. I don't think he wins the primary as of now, but he could, and I think that if he wins the primary, I don't want to say insta flip because I don't think anything really is an insta flip short of redistricting. But I still think that he would do poorly enough to lose. As of now, though, I will put it as tilt Democrat, which I think is completely fair. So, anyways, I got to sign off. One, they're closing the space I'm currently in. And two, I think this is a relatively well paced video. Kind of an introduction. There's a lot more happening. Stay tuned. We will be seeing each other again. Um, Never despair. I don't. I don't fucking know. Uh, the others may hate you, but those who hate you do not win unless you destroy yourself. Something like that. God bless Richard Nixon. Bye.